So then we are back with more understandings from the time of the Second Tabernacle services where we find in the Aramaic English translation of the word. This translation comes from the original manuscripts of the prophets of the Tzahelic lineage. So then we can understand the time of the end as per Yeshayahu the prophet. Then we find a layer of understanding of the 61st chapter, where then we begin our quest understanding the returning of the holy cities of the Messiah laid waste for many centuries. As we then read the world's market, most of the world then going up and down as far as the economy is concerned, then we have to ask ourselves, what is then the directive from the Creator? Because we read the inclusion of the Gentiles along with the 61st chapter. So when we study the 61st chapter, we understand then the restoration not only of the tabernacling, but also the restoration of the sticks. Let's understand what those mean. Simultaneously with the understanding of Yeshayahu, then Ezekiel the 37th chapter takes place at the same time. Gives you then the restoration of the holy cities laid waste for many centuries, thus tabernacling. Then the Gentiles were also included. Though we understand Ibrahim had a couple of sons, the first was Ishmael, and he was then treated as a king. So there is then kingship from the Gentiles, and then kingship from the Messiah. Let's try to understand these further. Because Gentiles relating with Ishmael, it's only a term where we understand leadership of the Gentiles. Started when Ishmael was a king. So let's understand why he was the king. He was a king because he was the first son. Ibrahim gave him the very best during his time until he was adult enough, more than likely around 40 years of age, where he was then old enough, then understanding his own task in life, primarily trade. So then we understand the organization of trade of the world. He was then a king. How do we understand this? Ibrahim, when he was living with his wife could not bear children. On top of it, then the land went through a severe famine. Then he went to Egypt and sold away his wife. Why would you want a wife if she couldn't bear children? But then we were dealing with a miraculous action later. But then Ibrahim, during the time, he didn't understand. So he got sick and tired of it, and he got rid of his wife. Then, in exchange for it, he received camels, animals, and then also servants. And then when he was nice in a very cushy situation, then Pharaoh was trying to get a bit frisky towards his wife, and then the Creator, no. Then instantly the next day he brought his wife back and sent him on his way. So then afterwards he had to fight against the spirit of the region. So he had to fight a war, and he won the war. And then came Melchizedek, the first non-Hebrew priest and king. Then he had an idea who the Messiah would be in the future. So then, afterwards, then he was very rich because he had then the deal over there in Egypt. Then he had the spoils of the war. Then he had a Hagar, servant from Egypt, a person that was speaking the language of the region, a person acquainted with the customs, a person acquainted with the trade of the area. So then he had a son with her, Ishmael. Then, when the boy was then an adult, Then Ibrahim gave the inheritance, and he started his company. How do we find this? Because obviously, then Joseph, much later, he was sold into slavery from a caravan of the Ishmaelites, from the lineage of the Ishmaelites. So then you understand, Ibrahim gave him an inheritance, as you would if you had a son or daughter. When the time comes, you give the inheritance. So then, much later, then Ibrahim went with his wife on their pilgrimage. Then they were alone once again. Then, sometime later, then they had the second son. So there was no fight in the tent, and then Sarah involved with intrigue and anger, and then problems in the tent. There were absolutely no problems in the tent. She was 100%. She never said a word as far as being against Ibrahim. Later they had the second son. That's the lineage of Yitzhak. So then when we understand these days where then the first stick and the second sticks are being then restored, then we understand what's coming. We find then the first stick of the Ishmaelites being restored. Why? Because in the future, when the world then is involved with the Chinese system, how do we know this? So let's just stop at this moment and understand the time of 1,000 years of deceit. Started in 1009, when the cities of the Messiah were then devastated, destroyed, laid waste. And Jerusalem and the tomb then was destroyed. The tomb that's there is not the original tomb. It is not. The original tomb was destroyed. So then we understand what was taking place then from the first 1,000 and the second 1,000. That's then the Bilderberg group. If you study, you find them. Roughly 1,000. Because the cities were no longer. The world was adrift. Had no directive. That's the new world order. Thus then the most prominent families would come together and try to come up with plans because the world was in shambles. Then it went on until 2009. So there is no longer use for the Bilderberg brothers or then groups or group. There is no more requirement because we are back on instructions, back on a schedule. So then, during the time of deceit, you find the facet of Nahashatan as devil. During this time of the restoration, on the level of Gentiles, we are during the time of the dragon. Then we find the angel speaking with Daniel of a period of time of going to and fro. 12th chapter, wasn't it? People going to and fro means confusion, time of the 1,000 years of deceit. Then we find a peak of knowledge around 08, 09, where then ended with a peak of knowledge. A peak of knowledge, 09, the end of deceit, then we've entered the schedule of the Creator. Whatsoever was in 09 should be more than enough for the usage of trade. Daniel was a tradesperson. So when you combine trade with a high knowledge, what do you understand of high knowledge? Computer. So computer mixed up with trade. What do you understand? China. The most modern computerized trade system in the world. What can you deduce from what's coming in the future? So then we find the world adjusting itself for the system, but then starts with a few kingdoms. So we are, during the time of the second Daniel, the base of the statue, where iron does not mix with clay. But then during this time of the restoration, it is refined further. How do we find this refinement even further? 11th chapter of Daniel. What do we read? The iron then becomes the northern kingdom, southern kingdom, and the east. The east, or the eastern kingdom, China, is given a particular chapter. Chapter 13. Exclusively for China. It is a spiritual understanding of Babylonian system and the dragon system. The 11th chapter gives you the Northern Kingdom, Soviet Union. Used to be. And it is returning as a socialist society, limited because they have China as the example. Then we find the Southern Kingdom, Africa. The rest is clay. So then we understand some kingdoms would be strong, some kingdoms would be weak. So then, at the moment we find the Babylonian system being led mostly by the United States, yet clinging to the old junk during the time of 1,000 years of deceit, devil. So when you hear devil means deceit. We are no longer in the facet of Nahashatan as devil. We are during the time of Nahashatan as the dragon's facet. So then, when we read the end of deceit in 2009, ending then with a peak of knowledge for trade, we find computers. Trade via computer. Government is no longer important. What is important is trade. Because the stick of authority of the trade must be given back to the Ishmaelites at some point, because they have the most crude. But then at the moment we find the world mixed up with the Babylonian system. We find Europe with the Babylonian system, and what they thought was God mixed up with trade. The Eurozone is not working. Proof of it, Germany has removed then, or is in the time of removal of the gold deposits from United States and France. We find 12 digits investors dumping US stocks. So the Babylonian trade system is waning. In other words, is becoming weaker and weaker and weaker. What do we find today? Our government is absolutely incompetent. We find the government injecting more money in the system via printing, and then poking around the other countries to entice them for war. A few days ago there was a huge complaint in Radio Korea International from South Korea, complaining that the US is then enticing the war in the region. Thus you find devil in this country poking around other countries to provoke them for war. Is it going to work? Then we find not only USA then destroying itself by printing out more money, enticing other people, as you can imagine, the ugly face of the devil with a fork in his hand, poking them around. Provoking Japan, they are printing out more money. Then provoking Australia, they are printing out more money, sending a ship over there in a hot zone. Where at the end of it, the dragon is going to have his way. If you don't understand this much of a spiritual warfare, then you are simply retarded and stupid. Such is our government. They're poking around of other countries, enticing them to join them for war because of their old system. It won't work. Read the instructions. What do we understand of trade? Trade in knowledge. Computer. There is a Chinese system coming yet in the future. And the best place for nations of this planet is then investing on the BRICS. Their banking system. It's the starting of the system yet coming. So try to realize yourself. The main component of the BRICS as a united economical system is infrastructure. If you can deduce the simplicity of the system, then you have to ask yourself why you are not understanding the system. We are speaking of China. At some point, China is going to get fed up with the world's market. European system is a piece of junk. North American system is even further a piece of junk. And we are poking other nations to go to war. At some point, China is going to turn to the Soviets, and they're going to hire them as their managers. Then we find the toughest country in this planet, or the Northern Kingdom. Then the situation will change a bit. Thus then we understand the later condition of the Northern Kingdom higher than the previous. And some people may say, you're not sure truly if it is Soviet Union, the Northern Kingdom. There is not much time left. If you understand the instructions, 5032, the Messiah was placed on a pole. He spent 2 days with the Samaritans, 2,000 years. That's what you get your understanding of the calculation. A day for the Creator is as 1,000 as a day, because he was spending 2 Yom creation days during his completion of the spring feast with a Gentile country, establishing tabernacling elsewhere other than Jerusalem. Prophecy expires in 7032 or 2032. By then the age must be closed. Autumn feast is then precisely 490 days. It's the other half of the instructions in the prophets. So who do you think is the Northern Kingdom? So then, the Soviets, they are already in charge of the BRICS. If other countries, they want to be smart, invest in the BRICS system. It is the very system coming shortly. And then obviously the other countries must retrieve themselves and prepare themselves. The other countries are clay. You don't find the West in the 11th chapter of Daniel. You don't find the West in any place else. So USA is going to waste its time and resources with this stupid engagement of North Korea, poking this Southern Korea around, and then poking Australia around, poking Japan around. It's not going to work because it's a Babylonian system. Does you understand the dragon at the end gets his way? Because China is the most advanced market computerized system on the planet. If you can't understand, then Daniel is speaking, then you have to ask yourself why you're not understanding. Or your mind was so washed away during the time of deceit, you think you can come up with your own answers. But we are on a schedule, and the schedule is the Creator's schedule. There is only one way of understanding and one way only. So this situation in North Korea won't work. The situation regarding the hot zone won't work. Our nation is going to waste time and resources, and they're going to be ended up as stupid and incompetent at the end of it. The problem is then afterwards, then the freighters of our country have to pick up the tab. The freighters must organize our country. What was the remark of the Messiah in the 8th chapter, then 10 chapters later? 8 and 1/8. The freighters of the earth. Did he say kingdom? Did he say governments? No, he said freighters. This situation of the United States becoming a police state, blah blah, it's junk. These FEMA camps dividing the United States in 10 places, you know. Each of those with their own scoundrels, it won't work. Because the freighters of our country must be in charge. And this country is going to end up provoking China so far, and at the end of it they're going to hire the Northern Kingdom services. It's the only way you can combine the recreation of then the Soviet Union and then the former becoming higher than the first, because they are linked up with the most powerful and competent computerized trade system of the planet. Thus then later becomes in the hands of the Ishmaelites because they have the most crude. So then, as the Messiah was speaking, being humble, shouldn't we as a nation then retrieving ourselves wisely for rebuilding? As it was spoken last year, we should have request more patrols from the Chinese. We didn't do it. It's becoming worse and worse and worse and worse. We are wasting more money, we are wasting more time, we have more responsibilities. So other than Europe and North America, The rest of the world should be involved with the BRICS. Invest in the BRICS system. And if you want to bet on your own terms. Because have this in mind, the Creator never made a mistake. And it won't be the first time. It is an absolutely clear path of the future, of the trade, of the couple of sticks. We understand what's coming, the trade in the system. If we humble ourselves and do as per the schedule, we can avoid a lot of trouble. If we insist in our own views and understandings of the 1,000 years of deceit, it won't work. And it becomes a whole lot more problematic. And if you think you are from some sort of a church with another prophecy understanding, be prepared, then review your gift or your function. This country, United States, has raw materials, has petroleum, has coal, but a very bad management. If we have understanding, then we would promote the past governor of the northern part of our country, Mr. Ventura, would be our best candidate, since the holy cities are not around yet where we could ask a prophet, true prophet. Then he would be our best bet. He worked for the Navy, he has knowledge of the military, he understands the economy. So the choice is ours. We can screw ourselves further, or we can retrieve and rebuild.